What if love, as you know it, is nothing more than a sophisticated illusion designed to hide our most primitive instincts? Nietzsche never approached love the way most would prefer, something pure, romantic, gentle. For him, love concealed a field of forces, a silent struggle where desire and domination intertwine. The philosopher saw in this feeling not an altar of purity, but a stage of instincts, masks and wills, seeking to impose themselves upon one another. What we call loving might not be surrender but appropriation. Perhaps it's not union, but an attempt to mold the other to our measure. What if love were less about fusion of souls and more about who holds power in the relationship? This is a provocation Nietzsche forces us to confront. Love may be one of the darkest places where the will to power reveals itself. Prepare to deconstruct illusions, dive into uncomfortable instincts, and question whether what you call love isn't just desire disguised as affection. If this type of reflection resonates with you, subscribe to the channel and follow this journey. Romantic love, as we know it, wasn't born with us. It's a construction, a cultural invention, built little by little upon myths, songs and religions that taught us to believe that loving means losing ourselves in the other. From early on, we hear stories that speak of halves seeking each other, of twin souls destined to complete one another. This narrative became so strong that many live and suffer in its name, as if it were a natural law of existence. But Nietzsche looked at this idea and saw in it a grand theater of illusions. For him, romantic love isn't life's truth, but a disguise, a delicate mask covering what pulses most brutally and instinctively within us. Nietzsche denounced that love, when idealized, becomes a field of reality denial. Instead of seeing what we truly desire, pleasure, dominion, life's continuity, we invent discourses that beautify these impulses. We call control sacrifice, we call appropriation surrender. Thus, we hide under soft words the harshness of what really happens. This is the romantic illusion he so criticized, believing that love is pure, altruistic, and immaculate. If we look carefully, we notice that almost all relationships carry this contradiction. Think of how many say, "I can't live without you," not as expression of freedom, but as a way to imprison the other in their need. Think of couples who describe themselves as accomplices, but where one controls the steps, thoughts, and even desires of their partner. The romantic illusion covers this reality, offering a poetic image that masks the struggle of wills. Nietzsche invites us to perceive that this idealization doesn't arise by chance. It was fed by religious and moral traditions that wanted to domesticate human instincts. The Church, throughout history, transformed love into something sacred, spiritualized, disconnected from flesh and vital potency. By doing this, it distanced us from raw instinct and made us believe that loving is synonymous with purity and transcendence. For Nietzsche, this operation is dangerous, as it weakens man by denying his deepest nature. It's at this point that his criticism of morality surrounding love emerges. When we romanticize, we forget that loving is also desiring, and that desiring is affirming life in its intensity, with all the tensions this carries. By hiding this truth under romantic fantasy, we not only deceive ourselves, but also condemn ourselves to inevitable frustrations. After all, how can we correspond to an ideal that never actually existed? Many suffer because they expect love to be eternal, but Nietzsche would remind us that nothing in life is fixed. Everything is flux, transformation, becoming. Loving someone as if this feeling were absolute and immutable is imprisoning oneself in an illusion that can only crumble with time. That's why we see so many people embittered upon discovering that initial passion wears away, that happily ever after doesn't sustain itself in concrete experience. The romantic illusion is comfortable, but it's also dangerous. It prevents us from seeing the real game of forces that inhabits love. It makes us believe we yield, when in truth we seek to dominate. It makes us suppose the other completes us, when in reality we project onto them what we want to conquer. Nietzsche doesn't propose we abandon love, but that we face it without veils. He calls us to look at love not as ideal, but as expression of the will to power that exists in each of us. Deep down, Nietzsche's provocation is simple and devastating. Could it be that what you call love is just a game of desires and forces disguised as purity? This question, even today, is capable of destabilizing even the most convinced. Because, by removing romanticism from the scene, only instinct remains, the body and the silent struggle that happens whenever two people meet. Perhaps by facing the romantic illusion, we discover that love was never what we were taught. It's not the fairy tale that lulled our childhoods, but rather a field of tensions where it's decided who shapes whom, who dominates, and who yields. Recognizing this is painful, but also liberating. Because only when we tear the veil of illusion do we begin to see love for what it really is, and only then can we choose how to live within it. When Nietzsche speaks of love as appropriation, he's not making a simple philosophical exaggeration. He's naming an instinctive movement that all of us, to a greater or lesser degree, carry within ourselves. Loving, according to him, rarely means accepting the other as they are. Loving means, many times, desiring that the other become what we need them to be. This desire to mold, to appropriate, to transform the beloved person into an extension of oneself is the most brutal mark of love seen through Nietzschean optics. The discourse of romantic surrender, so popular, usually hides this reality. When someone says, "I love you," what they really want to communicate may not be pure generosity, but rather, "I want you within my world. I want you adapted to my expectations. I want you to live according to my desires." Loving becomes, then, appropriating the other's freedom and fitting them into our limits. And the deeper the passion, the stronger this appropriation can be. Nietzsche didn't see this as an isolated perversion, but as a natural movement of life. Every form of life, he said, seeks to expand, impose itself, conquer space. Why would love be different? The instinct that leads us to breathe, to fight for survival, and to create also leads us to possess the other, to incorporate them into our own story. Thus, love reveals itself as a field of forces, where each tries to conquer territory in the heart, body, and even thoughts of the other. Just observe daily relationships. How many couples live constant conflicts because one of them can't bear the other's autonomy? How many loves begin as overwhelming passion and end as suffocating control? How many times do we call care what is, in truth, just an attempt to watch and direct another's life? Love, disguised as affection, often carries the gentle violence of possession. Nietzsche provokes us to recognize this uncomfortable truth. There's no love without some degree of appropriation. When we desire someone, we also desire to influence, mark, leave our impression upon them. Loving is, in a certain sense, colonizing the intimate territory of the other. It's no coincidence that so many love stories end in resentment when one of the two refuses to be molded. What we call romantic disappointment is, many times, just the frustration of not being able to dominate. This doesn't mean Nietzsche condemned love. On the contrary, he accepted it as a legitimate expression of life. What he criticized was the lie we tell ourselves by calling this appropriation absolute surrender. The philosopher preferred hard truth to sweet consolation. For him, it would be more dignified to recognize, "I love because I want you for myself, because I want to transform you into part of my life expansion," than to insist on the fantasy that loving is just giving oneself without expecting anything in return. This view may seem cruel, but it has liberating power. When we accept that loving is also appropriating, we begin to see our relationships with more clarity. We stop deluding ourselves with promises of perfect equality and start seeing the power games that cross every gesture. Thus, we can choose more consciously how far we want to let ourselves be appropriated and how far we want to appropriate the other. Imagine, for example, two people who decide to live a relationship knowing there will be disputes over space, time, and desire. They don't deceive themselves with the idea of total fusion, but recognize that each will try, to a greater or lesser extent, to influence the other's life. This consciousness doesn't destroy love, but makes it more realistic and perhaps even deeper, because it's lived without veils. Nietzsche believed that facing this truth is a form of strength. Only the weak need illusions to bear life. The strong face the world in its harshness. Thus, loving without denying appropriation is loving in a stronger, more honest, and paradoxically freer way. Because true freedom isn't in believing fantasies, but in looking reality in the eyes, and even so, choosing to remain. In the end, loving as appropriation leads us to a disturbing question. To what extent is what you call love, in fact, a gesture of possession? To what extent are your declarations of care just attempts at control? And to what extent are you willing to accept that loving is also dominating and being dominated? Nietzsche doesn't give us easy answers. He just removes the veil and leaves us before the mirror, forced to face what was always there, but we didn't dare admit. Nietzsche believed that at the bottom of all love hides an even more primitive pulsation, the instinct of domination. Loving isn't just desiring to be with someone, but desiring to exercise influence over that someone. It's not just about coexisting, but about marking, molding, leaving a symbolic scar on the other's life. When two people meet, each brings with them a will to power, and this will inevitably expresses itself in the loving relationship. If we look closely, we perceive that seduction is already a form of dominion. Whoever seduces seeks to capture attention, guide the gaze, awaken desire. Amorous conquest is, in essence, a silent battle for the mind and body of the other. It's no coincidence that amorous vocabulary is full of military metaphors. We speak of conquering hearts, of being defeated by charm, of surrendering to love. These expressions reveal, even unintentionally, that loving is deeply connected to the logic of struggle and domination. Nietzsche saw this not as perversion, but as natural expression of life. For him, the will to power is the fundamental force that moves all things, from the growth of a plant to the most complex creations of human culture. In love, this will reveals itself intensely. We want not only for the other to belong to us, but also for them to transform according to our expectations. We want not only to receive affection, but also to guide, direct, conduct. In daily relationships, this dynamic manifests in subtle and explicit ways. There are those who try to dominate through jealousy, controlling every step of their partner. There are those who dominate through seduction, keeping the other constantly trapped by the charm of their presence. There are those who dominate through fragility, forcing their partner to sacrifice themselves in the name of care. Even those who seem to place themselves in a position of total surrender may be exercising a refined form of power because they force the other to sustain the relationship. Thus, domination isn't just an authoritarian and clear gesture. It can disguise itself as sweetness, fragility, even silence. Nietzsche shows us that behind many declarations of love exists the desire to mold the other like a work of art. We love not only who the person is, but who we believe they can become under our influence. The man who desires his partner to be more docile. The woman who desires her partner to be more ambitious. Each hidden expectation reveals the impulse of domination, of creating in the other the form that most pleases us. This doesn't mean that amorous domination is always destructive. In some cases, it can be creative. By demanding more from the other, by challenging, by inspiring, we can drive transformations that strengthen life. Nietzsche didn't condemn the instinct itself, but the illusion of denying its presence. When we recognize that loving is also dominating, we can choose whether this domination will be suffocating or fertile, whether it will be prison or stimulus. The problem arises when we insist on believing that love is perfect equality. This ideal blinds us to the reality of forces at play. There's no human relationship without asymmetry, and in love, this asymmetry becomes even more evident. There will always be one who desires more, one who gives more, one who yields more. Absolute balance is a comfortable fiction. Life, according to Nietzsche, is movement, struggle, tension, never eternal stability. Perhaps that's why so many relationships collapse when the struggle for power becomes unbearable. What begins as seduction becomes suffocating control. What was once admiration becomes resentment. Loving is dangerous precisely because it's diving into this field of forces where every gesture can be both caress and imposition. Recognizing the instinct of domination in love can help us love with more lucidity. Instead of denying, we can ask ourselves, in what way do I exercise power over whom I love? In what way does the other exercise power over me? And how far are we willing to accept this dance of forces without completely annulling ourselves? Nietzsche doesn't offer formulas for harmony, but provokes the courage to look at love as it is, a risky game of wills that never cancel each other out, only confront, intertwine, and transform. In the end, Nietzschean love isn't a garden of peace, but a battlefield where two beings try, each in their own way, to affirm their potency. The question he leaves us is whether we have strength to live this game without masks, or if we prefer to continue lulled by the sweet lie that loving is just yielding. For Nietzsche, there's no love without body. All discourse about twin souls, spiritual affinities, and transcendental encounters is ultimately a mask trying to hide the carnal base of desire. Love begins in the skin, in the gaze, in the scent, in the invisible chemistry that unites two bodies. What we call passion is, above all, the language of the body speaking louder than any idea. Nietzsche distrusted those who wanted to purify love, transform it into something exclusively spiritual. He saw in this an attempt to deny life, to repress the vitality of instincts. But the body alone isn't enough. The human being, unlike animals, dresses their desire with masks. We love through words, promises, symbols, and gestures that don't reveal, but hide. The kiss can be tenderness, but also possession. The embrace can be comfort, but also prison. The body desires, but the spirit fabricates justifications that make this desire more acceptable. Thus the mask emerges, what we show in order not to reveal the brutality of instinct. Nietzsche would say the mask is inevitable. We can't live without it. But the problem arises when we confuse the mask with reality. How many believe they love someone for their goodness or pure soul, when in truth they were attracted by their physical presence, their beauty, their strength, or their vulnerability? The body screams, but thought translates this scream into moral or romantic language. It's from this translation that many amorous illusions are born. In daily life we see this clearly. People who swear they fell in love with values or ideals, but who only approached because there was first an undeniable physical attraction. Couples who claim to love each other for character, but whose desire dissolves when the other's appearance changes. The mask of romantic discourse serves to hide that the body was always the root of the relationship. Nietzsche, by pointing out this truth, isn't reducing love to something vulgar. On the contrary, he's returning to the body its forgotten dignity. Love isn't less profound for being carnal. It becomes more truthful when we accept its instinctive base. Denying the body in the name of ideals is for him an act of resentment against life. Loving fully is recognizing that desire is as important as the words that surround it. Desire, however, isn't stable. It oscillates, intensifies, exhausts itself. From this arises the tragedy of human love. What seems eternal can crumble when the body no longer responds with the same fervor. It's at this point that many try to sustain the relationship only in the mask, insisting on discourses of fidelity, duty, or custom. But Nietzsche would remind us that this attempt to maintain love against the body's will is violence against oneself. It's living in illusion, denying the truth of instincts. On the other hand, the mask also has its function. It makes desire socially bearable. If people said, without disguise, "I want you because your body attracts me, because your gaze dominates me, because your presence intoxicates me," many relationships would be scandalous. The mask of tenderness, poetry, spirituality softens this brutality and allows the amorous game to continue. In this sense, the mask isn't just deception, but also cultural creation. Nietzsche doesn't ask us to abandon masks, but to know how to see them as masks. He invites us not to be deceived by our own disguises. Loving is desiring, and desiring is appropriating the other through the body. Everything that comes after, promises, vows, oaths, are ornaments, attempts to domesticate this wild energy. The more conscious we are of this, the freer we'll be to live love without the false idealizations that make it fragile. In the end, the body is the stage, and desire is the main actor. The mask is just the costume, the ornament that disguises the real plot. The danger lies in confusing the costume with the play, in forgetting that what really moves us is the vital force of instinct. Nietzsche provokes us to tear away the veils and ask, what really attracts us in the other? What keeps us close to them? Is it the discourse, or is it desire? Love, or the will to power that manifests in the body? Perhaps facing these questions is uncomfortable, but only those who accept the truth of the body can love without illusions, and for that very reason, love with more intensity. Nietzsche never believed in the idea of balanced love, where two people meet in perfect harmony and remain equal in everything. For him, this was just another illusion invented to calm insecure hearts. Love, in its essence, is tragic precisely because it's never symmetrical. There will always be one who loves more, one who desires more, one who yields more. There will always be inequality of forces because life itself is imbalance, movement and tension. If we think about the relationships we know, we soon perceive this mark. How many times does one person surrender almost totally, while the other remains colder and more distant? How many times does a couple seem to live in harmony, but deep down, one of them conducts the relationship and the other just follows? Love is rarely an egalitarian dance. It resembles more a silent dispute, where each seeks to conquer space and preserve their own. Nietzsche saw in this not a flaw, but the very condition of human love. Loving is wanting to impose something on the other, and when two desires meet, they hardly balance. Even when there's true affection, even when respect exists, the difference in intensities still remains. Love is tragic because it puts in contact two wills to power that never completely cancel each other out. One always weighs more than the other. This impossibility of equality explains why so many relationships oscillate between passion and resentment. The lover who gives themselves entirely ends up, sooner or later, feeling exploited. The one who maintains more control may be accused of coldness or selfishness. The scale is never still, it oscillates, and in this oscillation, both moments of ecstasy and the deepest crises are born. Nietzsche would say that expecting equality in love is like expecting the sea to remain motionless forever. The nature of the feeling is oscillation. It can be intense and overwhelming, but it can also become burden and prison. Therefore, love always has something tragic. It promises plenitude, but delivers struggle. It promises fusion, but brings separation. It promises eternity, but dissolves in time. However, Nietzsche doesn't propose giving up love because of this. On the contrary, he invites us to accept it in its tragedy without wanting to make it perfect. Loving is risking oneself. It's accepting that there will be inequality. It's understanding that complete harmony will never come. Strength lies in embracing this risk, in living intensity even knowing it can bring pain. The weak seeks security, the strong accepts danger. That's why Nietzsche spoke of a love that doesn't deny suffering, but integrates it. Tragic love doesn't sustain itself on illusions of balance, but on the courage to live tensions without fleeing them. It recognizes that by loving, I can be dominated. I can dominate. I can lose or win. Nothing is guaranteed. And precisely because of this, each instant of love lived intensely counts as affirmation of life. In daily dramas, we see how this tragedy unfolds. A person who suffers for loving more than they're loved, but who still refuses to deny their feelings. Another who is loved excessively and feels suffocated, but who at the same time feeds on this power. Each relationship is a stage where these forces confront each other, revealing the impossibility of equality. Nietzsche, in his brutal vision, provokes us to abandon the fantasy of happily ever after. For him, life is made of cycles, of beginnings and endings, of intensity and exhaustion. Loving as if it were eternal is closing one's eyes to the tragic nature of feeling. True wisdom lies in loving knowing it can end, in surrendering knowing it can hurt, in living passion without asking for guarantees. In the end, the impossibility of equality in love shouldn't be seen as condemnation, but as challenge. It forces us to recognize that loving is always risking oneself in imbalance. The question is whether we have courage to live this risk without masks, without false promises, accepting that love's beauty lies precisely in its tragedy. Perhaps Nietzsche would tell us that love is only worthy when we face this truth. There will never be balance, but it's still worth diving in. Because love, in its pain and intensity, is one of the most potent ways to say yes to life. We arrive at the most challenging point of Nietzsche's vision of love, living without illusions. After tearing the veil of romanticism, of seeing appropriation, the instinct of domination, the force of the body and the tragedy of imbalance, an inevitable question remains: how to love after all this? If love isn't purity, nor equality, nor fusion, what remains? Nietzsche doesn't leave us orphans. He doesn't invite us to abandon love, but to reinvent it. Loving without illusions means accepting love in its brutality, recognizing that it's made of instincts, desire, power, masks and pain. It's looking at this feeling without expecting salvation or eternity from it. It's assuming it can be intense and ephemeral, sublime and cruel, creative and destructive, and still diving into it. Love without illusions is, above all, love for life. Because when we desire someone, we're affirming existence itself, saying yes to the intensity it offers us. Nietzsche saw in love a possibility of growth, as long as it wasn't imprisoned by false ideals. Those who love without illusions don't deceive themselves with promises of perfection. They know there will be pain, jealousy, inequality, and still choose to live the experience, because in it, the force of life manifests in pure state. This requires courage. Courage to admit we love also to dominate, to possess, to satisfy the body. Courage to accept the other isn't an extension of us, but someone with their own will who can resist, flee, or transform. Courage to love without asking for guarantees, knowing the end can come at any moment. It's a risky love, but also more honest. In daily life, loving without illusions can mean abandoning unrealistic expectations, not expecting the other to complete us, but seeing them as someone who walks beside us amid forces that clash and attract, not demanding love be eternal, but living it intensely while it lasts. Not believing it will always be harmonious, but accepting conflict as part of the experience. Nietzsche would tell us that loving this way isn't weakness, but strength. The weak need comforting stories to bear the world. The strong face reality in its harshness and still find beauty in it. Loving without illusions is like looking at an abyss and instead of retreating, deciding to dance at its edge. It's transforming tragedy into art, pain into creation, instability into intensity. This Nietzschean view offers us a key to liberation. How many don't suffer for expecting from love what it can never give? How many don't blame themselves because their relationship doesn't correspond to the romantic ideal learned since childhood? Nietzsche invites us to abandon these chains and love more freely, a love that doesn't need to be perfect to be true, that doesn't need to last to have value, that doesn't need to be egalitarian to be profound. In the end, loving without illusions is loving like one who affirms life in all its contradictions. It's accepting that love can wound and still choosing to live it because in it there's also creation, intensity, and potency. It's letting love be human, all too human, without transforming it into myth or promise of redemption. Nietzsche, if he could speak to us today, might ask, do you have courage to love knowing you can lose? Do you have courage to love without demanding perfection? Do you have courage to love without hiding the brutality that dwells within you? These questions aren't easy, but they open the way to a more lucid, stronger, and, paradoxically, freer love. Because only those who accept love without illusions can, in fact, experience it in all its potency. Throughout this journey, we've seen that for Nietzsche, love isn't purity, nor sacrifice, nor balance. It's instinct, appropriation, domination, desire, and tragedy. But it's also one of the most intense forms of affirming life. Loving without illusions means seeing the game of forces hidden behind romantic masks, and even so, choosing to live this intensity. And now I ask you, what was the greatest illusion about love that has imprisoned you until today? Share your answer in the comments and also tell us where you're watching from. If this reflection resonated with you, like the video, subscribe to the channel and follow us in this community that delves into philosophy to transform life.